The topic next we are going to see is about friction. So, with this term, what is friction? Is it not? So, we have the introduction for this. What is a friction is if a very gentle force in the horizontal direction is given to an object which is at rest. Let us consider a table and just consider that over this table you are applying a force and this does not move that rest on the table, sorry, an object which is resting on the table. So over the table if you have the object and if you apply the force, if it is not moving, it is because of the opposing force exerted by the surface on the object which resists its motion. So in the object oda இந்த பாயிண்ட்ல என்ன இருக்கு அப்படின்னு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா there is a opposing force. Okay, so there is an opposing force exerted by the surface on the object and this force is called as what? The frictional force. So அதுக்கு பேர் தான் என்ன சொல்றாங்கன்னா frictional force ன்னு சொல்றாங்க. So that frictional force is between the object, bottom of the object and the table. So அது ரெண்டுத்துக்கும் நடுவுல தான் என்ன இருக்கும்? This frictional force will be there. Okay, which always opposes the relative motion between the object and the surface. So what is the surface here? Surface here is the table, okay, where it is placed. And if the force applied is increased, the object moves after a certain limit. So if you are going to apply the force to a greater extent, so ரொம்ப force apply பண்ணோம்னா என்ன ஆகும்? This object may move, okay, and that is said to be the friction. Yes, clear with what is friction? That is a force which is between the object and the surface. Okay, so object ko surface ko nadula irukra force, that is said to be the frictional. Okay, next, just this is how the direction of external forces and how the direction of friction is. Suppose if you are going to apply the external force in this direction, then the friction will always act in the opposite direction. And same way, if you are going to apply the external force in this direction, then the friction will be in the opposite direction. So we have to know that the friction is always opposite to the external force. So this is the next diagram. This is external force and this side is a friction. Yes. So next we have with what is a static friction. There are two types of friction we have. The first one is static friction. Next one is kinetic friction. So what is meant by static? Static nale nala ஞாபகம் வச்சுக்கோங்க. We have to know the word which is rest. Rest is which is not moving. Okay. So static friction is a force which opposes the initiation of motion. So ஒரு ஆப்ஜெக்ட் மூவ் ஆகாம அதை அப்படியே ஸ்டாப் பண்ணி வைக்கும். Okay, when the object is at the rest on the surface, only two forces acts on it. They are what? First is gravitational force and the normal force, and the resultant of these forces on the object is zero. Okay, so resultant force என்னவா இருக்கும் நம்மளுக்கு? Zero-வா இருக்கும். As we know already, whenever you are considering with the object, there are two forces which are acting on it. One is the gravitational force and the other one is the normal force, is it not? So if the external force is applied, the object parallel to the surface on which the object is at rest and the surface exerts exactly an equal and opposite force on the object to resist its motion and tries to keep the object at rest. So suppose you consider that here is the object which you are placing and here there is an external force. So external force apply ஆனாலும் என்னது, there is a friction here இல்லையா? So அந்த frictionனால என்ன ஆகுது? This object will not move. So it keeps the object at rest. Okay, and so that the object will not move. Yes, then it implies that the external force and the frictional force are exactly equal. இந்த இடத்துல external forceம் frictional forceம் என்னவா இருக்கு? ஈக்குவலா இருக்குன்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. Therefore there is no motion. So the object is not moving அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. Okay, and next is if suppose you are applying a greater force, but if the external force is increased, எக்ஸ்டர்னல் ஃபோர்ஸை வந்து நம்ம வந்து இன்க்ரீஸ் பண்ணிட்டோம் அப்படின்னா என்ன ஆகும்? ஆஃப்டர் அ பர்டிகுலர் லிமிட் the surface cannot provide sufficient opposing frictional force to balance the external force. ஸோ அதுக்கு மேலே என்ன பண்ண முடியாது? அதால் பேலன்ஸ் பண்ண முடியாது. சப்போஸ் ஃபஸ்ட்டு கண்டிஷன் இஸ் you are applying with the external force. Here the external force is equal to the in the force. This is what that is a frictional force. So in the frictional force in the external force ஈக்குவலா இருந்தது அப்படின்னா என்ன ஆகாது இந்த ஆப்ஜெக்ட் வந்து மூவ் ஆகாது ஓகே நெக்ஸ்ட் கண்டிஷன் இஸ் இஃப் சப்போஸ் this is object and this is the external force. If the external force if you are applying to a greater extent so நிறைய external force கொடுத்தோம் அப்படின்னா என்ன ஆகும் this object moves okay so sufficient opposing frictional force அப்போதான் என்ன ஆகும் this object will move okay and that is said to be the static friction okay so static friction is when the object is at rest and you are applying and if you are applying the external force then the object starts to slide and this is a maximal static friction that cannot be exerted by the surface so this is the equation for static friction this is given by 0 less than or equal to f of s less than or equal to mu s of n so this is very important which is f of s which is equal to mu s of n here n is said to be the normal force and mu s is said to be the coefficient of static friction okay so mu s is said to be the coefficient of static friction n is said to be the normal force and but it need not be equal to mg always what is that that is a um, gravitational force. Here, the gravitational force need not be equal to mg. Okay, so clear with the condition for static friction. Static friction, the condition is 0 less than or equal to f of s less than or equal to mu s of n. Okay, so next is three conditions we have here. The first condition is if the object is at rest. So object restல இருந்துச்சுன்னா there is no external force. அப்படி இருக்கும்போது the static friction என்னவா இருக்கும் ஜீரோவா இருக்கும் okay so if the object is at rest there is no external force and hence the static friction is zero okay so this is the first condition then the second condition is if the object is at rest and there is an external force first condition object rest there is no external force upper static friction is zero here the object is at rest there is an external force இருக்கு அப்போ the force of static friction is equal to the external force so static friction ஓட force external force எப்படி இருக்குன்றாங்க ஈக்குவலா இருக்குன்றாங்க okay so object is at rest no there is an external force இருக்கும்போது static friction force external force equal so f of s is equal to the external force yes clear with the second condition okay then we have the third condition the third condition is when the object begins to slide so object ரெஸ்ட்லயே இல்லை என்ன இருக்கு ஆப்ஜெக்ட் வந்து மூவ் ஆகுது ஸோ அப்படி மூவ் ஆகும்போது the static friction is maximum okay so when it is moving the static friction is maximum so we have the condition that is the three conditions what are the three conditions is first the object is at rest okay and there is no external force so external force நம்மளுக்கு இல்லை அப்படின்னா என்ன ஆகும் there is no static friction okay so upon there is no external force then the force due to static friction is what zero okay next condition is the same object is at rest but there is an external force no external force இல்லைங்க there is an external force அப்படி இருக்கும்போது the static friction is equal to the external force okay so appo f of s is equal to f of external next the object is moving okay so third condition is this so third condition is object is moving அப்படி இருக்கும்போது the f of s is equal to what maximum சரியா so first condition f of s 0 okay second condition f of s is equal to f of external next f of s is maximum yes clear with these three conditions is kinetic friction. So what is a kinetic friction is opposite of static friction. So static friction the object will be at rest and if there is a friction here the external force if it is greater than the maximum static friction what happens the object slides when the object slides that it has a friction that is called as a kinetic friction so object slide ஆகி வரும்போது ஓகே கீழே வந்தது அப்படின்னா there is a friction இல்லையா ஸோ அந்த ஃப்ரிக்ஷனுக்கு பேர் தான் என்ன சொல்றாங்கன்னா static friction அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க ஓகே so what is the equation for this static friction is before that this This is external force and this side will be the static friction. Always I told you that opposite side will be the kinetic friction. Okay, here also this is external force and this side is a kinetic friction. Okay, so the equation is given by f of k is equal to mu of k into n. Okay, there we have written the equation for static friction which is given by f of s which is equal to mu of s into n ன்னு எழுதணும் இல்லையா. Here we have the kinetic friction, so f of k is equal to mu of k. K ன்றது என்னது coefficient of kinetic friction, அதில் coefficient of static friction. n ன்றது எப்பவுமே என்னதுன்னா normal force தான். Okay, and always this mu of k is less than mu of s, so coefficient of kinetic friction is always less than the coefficient of static friction. Okay, so this is a condition of static friction. Yes, clear? Then next we have the features of kinetic and static friction. First is it opposes the starting of motion. It opposes the relative motion. Okay, so starting இதில் வந்து ப்ராப்ளமாக இருக்கும். Here relative motion is difficult. Okay, independent of surface of contact, here also it is independent. Then mu s depends on the nature of materials in mutual contact. Here it depends on the nature of materials and also the temperature. Okay, so this is about the comparison of static and kinetic friction. Yes, clear with this? To move an object, to push or pull, which is easier? Okay, pushing an object is easier or pulling an object is easier? For this, first let us draw the diagram for pushing an object. Okay, so this is the object we are considering. So in this object we are going to push this. So push பண்றோம் அப்படின்னா here will be the force, is it not? And that force is now split into two components here. One is f of cos theta and the other one is f of sin theta. Okay, so this f is split into two components, cos theta and sin theta. And now here there is a friction இல்லையா. So in the friction another static friction, so that we are writing as f of s. Okay, and this I'm going to draw it as free body diagram. So considering this to be the center one. Okay, so in the side தான் என்ன இருக்கு f of s இருக்கு. So அதை இந்த பக்கம் வரைஞ்சிடுறேன். அதே மாதிரி மேல இருந்து இங்கே தான் என்ன வருது f வருது. So அதனால இங்க இருந்து இத மாதிரி. Okay, then whenever you consider the object we have with the two forces which is normal force and the gravitational force, is it not? So that I'm writing here is n and mg. Okay, so this is about the diagram for pushing an object. Okay, then equation based on this diagram, when you see here this n is pointing along the upward direction, and same way when you consider this y-axis alone. Okay, so what are the components which are acting is upward it has normal force and downward it has a gravitational force which is mg. And same way here also when you see this f cos theta is also acting along the downward direction, so this I am writing as f cos theta. Now this can be written as n is equal to ஏன்னா upward எது இருக்கோ that is equal to sum of this both. Okay, so this can be written as mg plus f cos theta அப்படின்னு எழுதுறோம். Okay, because these are all acting along the y direction. Okay, so n is equal to this. Okay, so taking with this equation, and we are also going to take with the equation from static friction. So what is the equation from static friction is that is given by f of s is equal to mu of s into n. So first we are writing with this equation as it is. So what is the first equation? N, which is we are pushing it, so we are writing as n of push which is equal to mg plus f cos theta. Now this equation we are taking, instead of this n of push I'm going to substitute this equation. So in the equation la பாத்தீங்கன்னா இதுதான் கிராவிடேஷனல் ஃபோர்ஸ். ஸோ அந்த கிராவிடேஷனல் ஃபோர்ஸை விட எக்ஸ்ட்ராவாக நம்ம அதிக ஃபோர்ஸ் கொடுக்கணும். ஸோ வி ஹாவ் அ கிரேட்டர் ஃபோர்ஸ் when you are applying the push. Okay, same way when you are going to write this for pulling an object, we have the diagram for pulling an object here. This is given by, so this is how you pull an object. So force is pointing in the opposite direction. So this is how where you are writing with f cos theta. This side we have with f sin theta. Now same way this is object, Here is a static friction, and here we have the force, and upward normal force and downward mg. Okay, so this I am writing only for y components. So n mg, and along the same direction we have with f cos theta இல்லையா. ஸோ அப்போ இதுக்கான ஈக்குவேஷன் எப்படி எழுதுவோம் அப்படின்னா f cos theta plus n is equal to mgன்னு எழுதலாமா, பிகாஸ் அது ரெண்டும் upward directionல இருக்கிறதுனால f cos theta plus n is equal to m into g. Okay, now bring this term to the other side, so we get n is equal to mg minus f into cos theta. So in the equation na first equation எழுதிருப்பாங்க. So only if you know with this diagram you'll be able to write with that equation. Okay, so that equation is given by mg minus f into cos theta. So from this இதுல இருந்து என்ன சொல்லலாம் அப்படின்னா இதுல என்ன டேர்ம் கிடைச்சிருக்கு, mg யோட மைனஸ் பண்ணாதான் f cos theta மைனஸ் f cos theta. ஸோ அப்போ கிராவிடேஷனல் ஃபோர்ஸை விட நம்மளுக்கு வந்து லெஸ்ஸான வேல்யூ தான் கிடைக்கும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. ஓகே, ஸோ we can say that it is easy to pull an object than to push it. Okay, so it is given as it is easier to pull an object than to push it. Okay, thank you.